so nice to be at this great institution. My first visit to Wharton. I have some very good friends. One is an Israeli-American who graduated here many years ago, and he's been telling me for years, you must visit my school, Wharton, and here I am. I come with a message. You might say, why am I here today? No one paid me to be here. I'm a volunteer. Since leaving the Congress, I set up a foundation, Truth in Government. You've heard of truth in advertising. I believe in truth in government, basically numbers. Why? Because you're not getting the right numbers. That's the trip I'm going to take you on today, but I'm going to put it in the context of our economy and why it should matter to you, because we're spending your money. The debts that you're going to hear about are not just the debts that you hear about in the paper. The debts I'm going to tell you are basically the real debts if real accountants were preparing the books of the United States of America, independent of politics. The trouble today is that politics is trumping everything, and that whoever is in charge, the numbers are made, in effect, to make them look better than what they are. This is the crisis we face. When I got to Congress in 1985, I noticed at the end of a row of seats a computer terminal. Well, you had to. That's the way we vote. But many of you probably don't know that Congress votes, at least the House, with a plastic voting card like this. It's changed a bit since then. This wouldn't work today, those perforations. But in those days, I would put this in to vote. Yes, a green light goes up by my name. No, a red light. Orange, present, abstain. I realized as a CPA that this really is a credit card, because every time I was putting it in, I was raising the national debt. Now, you're too young to remember, I think, but even under Ronald Reagan, that great fiscal conservative, we had $200 billion deficits in at least one of those years. That's why we tried to come up with a formula called Graham-Rudman-Hollings-Mack, 25% a year to get the budget deficit down where it would be zero, therefore we would not be adding to the national debt. So basically, what I did to get attention in Congress, and by the way, I'm the first practicing CPA ever elected to Congress. What does that tell you? That tell you not enough people are worried about the numbers. Today, you can count 10 CPAs in Congress, but only, I think, 2 of them were practicing, came out of accounting firms to run. And how many legislators do we have? 535, 100 in the Senate, 435 in the House. And yet, I think numbers are the most important thing we have to deal with, because even economists have to project based on good numbers. And without those numbers, we're not going to know where we're going if we don't know where we are. So here is my image for you. I didn't come here to educate you. You're already educated about a lot of things. I came here in part to inform you. But I really came here to wake you up. This is your country. This is your future. This is your money. And that bomb is ticking right now. And the key word on that chart that you'll hear coming up more and more in this country is unsustainability. What is fiscal unsustainability? Fiscal unsustainability is the inability to borrow the money that we're spending, that we're not raising, and paying off debts that are not recorded on the books in the future so that we can continue serving the public. At some point, we run out of money. Now, what's ticking about that bomb today? It's the interest on the national debt. You have right now a rigged Federal Reserve System. They have artificially reduced the interest rates to 0. If you were to go and borrow today, Treasury bills today, the rate that's being paid on Treasury bills less than a year, when you consider the inflation rate is around 2%, it's basically negative interest. Why is that? Because relative to the rest of the world, we're the safest place to put money. So people are willing to put money in our Treasury bills and not get anything on it as long as they know it's secure and they're waiting for something to happen. Look at the 10-year Treasury bills, less than 2%. So we have a Federal Reserve which is so frightened about where we're going, because they don't know where we're going. We are in uncharted waters. No one can tell you where we're going today. We thought growth was going to be over 3% last quarter of 2011. Shocked a lot of people, 2.8. It looks like growth this year may be less than 2.5. Could be 2. We don't know. There are so many imponderables going on, not only in the United States. Look at Europe. Look what went on in Greece just last week, a couple of days ago. They've lunched out for 20, 30 years. People were seduced by politicians into thinking that you could retire at 55. And if you had an emergency-type job, maybe at 50. And if you had a connection with someone in Parliament, they could redefine your category. People didn't pay taxes. Debt's running up. They kept borrowing. But someone finally read the Riot Act to the Greek government, and you could see what's happening. The people are saying, we can't take this austerity. But yet the Greek Parliament was told, especially by Germany, the Eurozone, that if you don't do this, you're not going to get the bailout. Now, obviously, everybody's walking a tightrope, because if they don't get bailed out and they leave the Eurozone or they default, then you could trigger the worst possible thing, something in Italy, a much bigger economy. And certainly we've seen that other economies are also not that good in France and Portugal and Spain. So we have a global picture that's emerging, and we are part of that picture. What are you going to do as citizens? You're going to leave Wharton with a great education. I hope, in part, you decide that it's not only going to be important enough to make money, that you decide money's important. Without that, you don't have independence. That's why we need to be a strong economy, because you can trust the United States. You can't trust China. We can't, in terms of the system and the morals and the way they treat people. I'd rather see the United States, just for that, be number one, and not a country like China. But they're gaining on us, as is Brazil and Germany. So we got to be careful. But you're going to be part of that solution. So you have to understand what's going on, and I hope today to give you, in a short space, the things that you need to be concerned about. So I'm going to start with what I think is the warning sign. Signs of America in decline. Now, I wish I could tell you I came up with this on my own, but you look at the bibliography. There's a very good book that just came out by Zbigniew Brzezinski, National Security Advisor under Clinton, I believe, and maybe Jimmy Carter. And he's looking for a strategic vision, and that's the name of the book, A Strategic Vision for America. But he's pointing out why we have to be concerned about America. And before I get into the numbers and tell you why this card is the most expensive credit card in the world, that's why I put it on the front of 2 books, by the way. You've got my current book, but there's another book here that I put out in 1992, in which I put it on the cover. Here it is. I painted it gold, Congressional Credit Card, credit line unlimited, expiration date never, bill to future generations. That's what it says on the cover of this book. On the book you have, I converted it to a national debt card. You'll see it. And I put it on the backs of young people. How can you tell they're young? They're nice and thin, athletic. They have ponytails, one of them. These are young people. So the debt is on your backs. And by the way, that's not St. Peter's burning on the front cover. That's the capital of the United States of America. I wanted to make it apocalyptic so you would kind of wake up that you have to jump into this pool. You've got to do something about this, okay? Because it's not happening in Washington. We've gone now 4 years without a budget. 3 years, this will be the 4th year without a budget. You might say, how could that be? That's how gridlocked and how partisan Washington is today. And I'll tell you how I think we might change that in the future. It's not going to be with better accounting. It's going to be with better leaders and a better electoral system. But that's at the end of the speech. Okay, unsustainability of our growing debt. Now, you're being told that the debt of the United States of America is approximately $15 trillion. That is the outstanding Treasury bills, Treasury notes, Treasury bonds. But if you look at what the government publishes, they always focus on a number of 2/3 that, about 10 trillion. It's in the papers today. And what's that number? That's the debt held by the public. What's the difference? Well, because we've got $5 trillion, believe it or not, in the Social Security and Medicare trust funds. Why? Because we took the money and spent it on other things. Now, was that wrong? No. You can't invest $5 trillion in the stock market, so obviously it would be better to lend that money to the United States of America. But what they did with the accounting was, for 40 years, and by the way, this started with Lyndon Baines Johnson, they came up with a gimmick called a unified budget because he had an unpopular war called Vietnam. What did he decide to do? He saw all that cash sitting in Social Security and the Medicare was just beginning. He said, why don't I just meld that cash against the budget deficits so that it looks like the deficits are not that big and then people might not question the cost of the war. So for 40 years, we've been offsetting the budget deficits reported to the American people by the surpluses, the annual surpluses in the Social Security and Medicare trust funds. Okay? Now, you might say, is that happening today? Well, it would happen today except for one thing. Guess what happened last year for the first time in 40 years? Social Security is taking in less than it's paying out. So obviously now it's going the other way, and it's increasing the deficits. I'm waiting for the wise guy or lady that's going to now say, why do we need this unified budget? Let's put the Social Security off budget completely. Let's not unify it so we don't have to show the deficit in Social Security. But it shows you how they can manipulate numbers. And why are they doing that? Because people want to get reelected. I hate to sound so cynical, but that's basically, what's going on. So the debt is a big problem. But I'm going to show you a chart later that's going to show you that the 15 trillion is not even the problem. Because if you were a publicly traded company, you would be mandated to get an outside actuary to compute the present value of your pension and entitlement liabilities to put on a balance sheet so that the Securities and Exchange Commission would not indict your board for securities fraud. That's generally accepted accounting principles. And what do we have off our books right now? You'll see it on another chart, but I'll prepare you for it because we're going to have to go fast after I get this thing going, is Social Security and Medicare present value of the obligations for people who are working and retired have to be measured, and they are measured, and have to be recorded if you're a publicly traded company through SEC standards on your balance sheet. But we do have a balance sheet. It came out. Guess where they put those numbers in our financial statement, signed off by the Treasury Secretary, Comptroller General? They put it in footnotes. Education. We have to rethink how we spend money on education in this country. Where have we gone? Last year, we spent $125 billion loans from the federal government, right? That last year, $125 billion. 8 million Pell Grants, totaling another $34 billion, and yet we go down and rank every year against China and other countries. We used to be K to 12, number 1, 2, 3. Now we're somewhere up above 15. Overall, in all education, we're somewhere around 20. We're spending a fortune. What does that tell you? Maybe we got to get the federal government out of education. Maybe it's got to be put back to the states where it can be accountable, transparent, and controlled better. And maybe that's one of the issues that you got to face as citizens. Redefine government. Why are we doing so much in the federal government? Why is the federal government the paymaster for everything? That's not what the Founding Fathers intended. The Founding Fathers created sovereign states. If you hear the political rhetoric today, you would think that the federal government created the states. No, the states created the federal government. So we got to define, going forward, what is more efficient for the federal government to do. And by the way, there are things that the federal government must do, like national security, whether it's efficient or not. It's got to be done at that level. But we got to talk about that a little bit. I want to get you thinking about the key things that are going to affect your life going forward. Okay? So, education is faltering. Partisan gridlock all over the place. 3 years without a budget, and it looks like we're going to have a fourth. What does that tell you? Our electoral system is not working. Why isn't it working? Well, look at the way they redistrict. Why am I not a congressman? I tried to go back in a tough district. They changed it. I was in Westchester County. They put my district, 1/3 of it, across the Triborough Bridge. And gave me even more Democrats so I couldn't get elected. And you would think, why not just one CPA in Congress? No, because politics drives the system back then, and it's driving it today. And it's wrong. Has to change. How are we going to change it? Look at this year. It's going to be a waste. Nothing's going to be accomplished until we have a new president. So you might say, why do we have 2 terms for president? Why not 1 6-year term rather than 2 4-year terms? What's all this business about, getting prepared for the next election? Why 2 years in the House? Why not 4? Now, the consultants are not going to like it. Media people are not going to like it because they make a lot of money, especially now with that, I feel, bad decision on Citizens United, Supreme Court, where you have tons of money now coming in to these super PACs. Money cannot drive the system, but it is right now. And politics is trumping everything. That's why you have political gridlock. Unless we get a balanced budget, you can't reduce the debt. And unless you reduce the debt, the ticking time bomb could go off because guess what's going to happen? You can't keep interest rates down this low forever. You can't. They're going to start going up. But you can be sure, I don't care what they tell you, that in 4 or 5 years, you're going to see interest rates going back to 5, 6, 7%. What's that going to be on the debt that we have? Just the debt that the public holds. You're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars in interest that are going to have to be paid that we're not counting on right now. Okay. Unconstrained growth of entitlements. Did you hear a debate yet on what we're going to do with Social Security or Medicare? It's the third rail of politics. No one wants to lose the senior vote. They don't even want to talk about raising the retirement age. We know that people are living into the 70s and 80s, and yet our retirement rates are now, I think, up to 67 for Social Security. It used to be 65. It's up to 67 because they did change it back then. Now, should you change it for people that will be affected today? No. The idea is to change it for people who are about 55, but let them know that we're going to add maybe 2 or 3 years to that retirement age so they can plan for it. They don't even want to discuss that because it's easily taken out of context and one party could blame the other for taking away Social Security, and they know that who votes most? The seniors. You, ladies and gentlemen, have to jump into that pool. You have to become an empowered group to take that mantle back from the seniors as the highest percentage voting bloc in our country and get it back to you because it's your money we're talking about. Misguided policy, foreign policy decisions. Need I describe the big mistake we made in the Iraq War? Looking back, now we know for sure. But even then, was it necessary to declare war in Iraq? Was it necessary to say we need a war in Afghanistan? Sure, we should go after terrorists. We've got 16, intelligence agencies, including the CIA. We have drones. Why do we declare war in Afghanistan? And today, half of the $100 billion a year we're spending in Afghanistan, and it's probably going to stop now because we got such a mess there, is going on infrastructure. We have bridges falling down here in America. These are the things that you have to weigh in on with your votes, with your activism. And get active. No matter what your political aspirations are, get involved. I'm a Republican, and I've gone 3 times now down to Occupy Wall Street to give out my book for nothing, and I met very intelligent people of the opposite party. But to show you how focused we are on parties, some people would come up to me, what's your party? I said, well, I'm a Republican. Well, I don't want to hear you. Why don't you want to hear me? I'm a CPA. I want to give you my book. I had to cajole them to come in to listen. This is how mindless we are getting as a country. We are compartmentalizing America by parties. And it's got to change. Your real party has to be America. Look at the big picture. While we're fighting here, China is going to have a growth rate next year of 8%, and they're trying to get it down to 8 because they don't want to see inflation really get away with itself. So we got to look at these things. Consequences of America in decline. It's one thing to say that we think we're in decline. Am I saying that we're in decline? I say the signs are not good. I didn't come here to bury America. I keep thinking about what Mark Antony said at the funeral of Julius Caesar. I didn't come here to bury the United States, but I came here to wake you up. And I hope I'm going to do that by the end of this. Now, increased domestic social tension and class warfare. We keep hearing about the 1%, Occupy Wall Street on one end, Tea Parties on the other. How far is this going to go until this country can be just torn apart? Okay? But if we are declining, guess what? There's going to be competition for less jobs, competition for less advantages, that you get as an American, and you'll create much bigger tensions because the poor can't go down any lower than they are, and we have a country that has a lot of poor people in it. And this is America. So you've got to be careful that we understand there's only so far we can go. Increased political polarization, legislative gridlock. Hey, can it get any worse? You tell me. I can't believe it. Just look at the talking heads. You don't see them agreeing on anything today. And I don't think it's going to happen in a presidential year, and that means we have to change the system because we can't afford to wait 1 or 2 years to find the next president and to hear what he really wants to do or she wants to do. Increase regional conflicts. I appreciated Brzezinski because he's very smart when it comes to foreign affairs, and just look what he's saying. If America declines and we're not strong, this is the door that's going to open up. Russian claims, we're going to have regional conflicts. Russia may go back and claim Georgia, Belarus, and Ukraine. Taiwan, obviously, is going to become vulnerable to China, though they seem to be getting along quite well right now with trade and whatnot, and the new president elected in Taiwan. Israel probably will become more vulnerable to the Arabs. It's in the worst part of the world you can think of right now. Afghanistan becomes a base for international terror. We're withdrawing right now. Pakistan, ouch, becomes a nuclear Iran. Could become a base for militant Islam and anti-West thinking. Right now, we have so little cooperation in Pakistan. You could see the tensions that we have right now because there's a lack of cooperation. That whole area should have never been just focused on Afghanistan. My wife told me many times, Joe, this is a regional problem. It's India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. Those borders have never been secured, and until there's a regional solution, nothing's going to work. And Afghan's going to fail, and she was exactly right. That's what's happening right now. Increased nuclear proliferation. Why? Well, if America is not there strong, then countries are going to say, well, I got to depend on myself, and for security, I need a nuclear bomb. And that's going to create more proliferation and danger. And then finally, forget about the environment at that point. Who's going to pay attention on the problems? We got those issues right now with China. Its growth engine is going so big. Its need for energy is so large. They're still burning coal. Much of it is dirty coal. And we can't seem to control that as much as we'd like right now. So with that, let's go to the next slide. Okay, just a quickie. What is this slide telling you? It's telling you that we went nowhere for 10 years. This is a job slide. There's 138 million jobs in 2001. Where are we today at the end of 2011? 139 million. This is why we're in trouble today. We lost a decade. Now, why can't I tell you where we're going? Because every month those numbers come out, we don't know yet whether or not that good spike we had last month and the month before is going to last. Are we going to go back to 9% unemployment? And there's some things that you don't see in those numbers that smart people like you should know about. You might say, Professor, that the unemployment rate is 8.5%. But many people are saying the underemployment rate, because many of those people have jobs paying much less than before and are on temporary employment, is somewhere around 12%. And if you add back the people who got so disgusted looking for work that just withdrew from the workforce and therefore are not in the numbers, some people are saying the unemployment rate is well over 15%. Ouch. I mean, if those numbers are for real, that means if we come back as an economy, some of those people may jump back into the job market, and then you're not going to get that employment rate down as fast as you think. So we got a lot of building to do here in America. This is the Fed. This is M1 and M2, okay? Look where it went. Forget about 1960, 2000 to 2010. That is the Fed printing money. That's why Ron Paul has such a good following. He's a smart guy. There are many things he's saying that I like, including audit the Fed. Why can't we audit the Fed? Right now it's a black box. We still don't know what the Fed's balance. They're starting to tell you that it's kind of like $3 trillion, but some people say it's way more than that. So why shouldn't we have an audit of the Fed so we know what did the Fed print and what's on its balance sheet right now with all this quantitative easing? What is that quantitative easing? That's money being let out there for people to use, hopefully to create employment, economic growth. but a lot of it has been done very inefficiently. A lot of that money, as you know, went for the bailout, about $1 trillion worth of it, and people are saying today it didn't go to the right place. It went to the banks, and the banks, what they did was they gamed us. They took the money, invested it in Treasury bills. They got it at 0.25% at the discount window, 0.25% interest. They borrowed, and they're investing at 2%. And they're showing their earnings going up. Come on, that's not why we had a bailout. But look how far we drove up the money supply, okay? Was it necessary to do? Yes. Without that, we could have had one of the biggest recessions, if not a depression. We know we've had the largest recession since 1932. There's no question about that, economic downturn. Could it have been worse? Probably. But, hey, where are we going? When are we going to stop this kind of, what is it called, price control? The price of money is interest. You probably don't remember Richard Nixon. He had wage and price controls. It took us years to get out of it once we did. Once you let the markets back to do what they have to do. How long is it going to take for the Fed to allow the markets now to set interest rates and not artificially set by the Fed? But did we need it? Yes, we needed that intervention. Fiscal policy. Here it is. The deficit that we're showing is $1.27 trillion. This is the deficit for this fiscal year. Very timely. It was just announced yesterday publicly. I got this before because they were talking about what they were going to announce. But frankly, when you look at the numbers individually, except the big ones, I don't think you can pay any attention because I don't know what the political process is going to give us in terms of cuts on entitlements, in terms of tax increases. Right now, you have a politically oriented budget given out by the President of the United States, and obviously you're going to hear him saying that he's got to balance the books or at least hold the deficit down to $1.3 trillion. So this is fiscal policy. We use two things to affect the economy. One, monetary policy, that's the Fed. The Fed is totally independent. Right now it's not being audited, and I hope it's not subject to politics. I think Bernanke is a pretty honest guy, but so is Greenspan. And what did Greenspan say at the end of his thing? I made a mistake. I forgot about human nature. I didn't think that people would do that to each other and put people in houses they couldn't afford, and therefore now we've got this big problem. His whole deal was to keep inflation down. He did. But he didn't realize there was another demon in the system, and that was the politics of putting people in houses, getting their votes, but a lot of them didn't have jobs, couldn't pay it back, and now we're stuck with a big mess that we got to clean up. And that was a Community Reinvestment Act, by the way. There was a law that created that. Okay. These are the deficits since World War II. Okay? You don't see much going above the line. Now, remember the Clinton's always claiming, I balanced the books 4 years in a row. There it is. Actually, it was, I think, 3 years. But it may have been 4. Okay. There it is. Late 90s, early 2000s. Those are the Clinton years. But that's a lie. Because if you were to add back the surpluses, if you were to take out the surpluses from the trust funds, you would have real deficits. But even that would be a lie. Because they should be using generally accepted accounting principles in the budget process. What does that mean? The accrual system. Right now, the budget process is totally based on cash flow. If I have it in my hand, it's part of my assets. If I, pay it out to you with a check, it's an expense. No, that's not the accrual basis. Accrual. What's accrual? You accrue an expense when you get the bill or when you have a liability that is fixed and determinable. You don't have to wait until you pay it. It's got to be put on the books as a liability, an obligation, even though you haven't paid out the cash. That's the accrual basis. We're not using that in determining these. So the deficits are much larger. One thing would make it much larger. One thing alone. There are many things, but the one thing that would be the present value, actuaries can give you this, of the difference between what I am taking in on Social Security and Medicare and what I'm paying out over the next, they use a 75-year rule. Present value basis, we are in a hole. They say on Social Security, you're going to see a chart on it, about $8 trillion, and Medicare above $20 trillion. Now, you can measure that every year. And you can measure the incremental growth. So every year there should be an increment of that number if you wanted to know the real deficit. Banks have to do it. Does a bank wait until a loan goes bad before it puts the loss on the books? No, it's supposed to, like the allowance for bad debts, anticipate, based on the experience in the past, how many of these loans am I not going to collect? It has to be put on the balance sheet today, even though the loan is still on the books. And by the way, they're not doing that with the houses. They managed to cajole the accounting profession to do something they shouldn't have done. Let's keep going here. Okay. All right, what do we got here? This is fiscal year 2010. Hasn't changed that much, but look what we got. We've got the federal debt. That's what the federal government wants you to think the debt is. That's the debt held by the people. People who buy Treasury bills, put them in money market funds. And by the way, that's also the debt held by foreigners. Anybody that holds debt is, in 2010, what's our fiscal year? September 30th, 2010. Now we're up to September 30th, 2011. That number this year just went over 10 trillion. Okay? So the new chart that I'm going to make will show 10 trillion right there. Now, look at what you have just before that. Veterans benefits and federal employees benefits. These are on a pay-as-you-go basis. Civil service pensions, military pensions, all kinds of pensions in Washington, and that debt is about 5 trillion. That's an obligation, by the way, they do put on the balance sheet of the United States of America. That's about $5 trillion on a pay-as-you-go basis, not funded. Now, look at the next one. There's your Social Security. That's not the Treasury bills that I told you about. That number really should be 15 trillion here if you included the Treasury bills that have been assigned to Social Security and Medicare trust funds. Those are the bills that accrue interest. You don't pay it out till you pay out the benefits. So that number is not in that number you saw before on the chart that said interest expenses. Let me see if I can go back there just for a minute. There it is. Interest on the debt, $251 billion. That's probably the lowest interest we've had in years and years because we have refinanced our debt down to such a short term, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, that the interest rates are low now, so the interest that we're paying in aggregate is low. But that does not include the interest we're accruing for the Treasury bills that are in the Social Security Trust Fund. And that number, I believe, in 5 years is going to be well over $500 billion. And that money is coming out of education, roads, you name it. That's the danger of the ticking time bomb on the Fed side. All right, Medicare, there's your 20. Now that number was in excess of 30 until someone decided in public documents to say that Obamacare, the Health Act, saves about $10 trillion, and they reduced it from 32 to 22. No one can prove that yet. So we'll just forget that. We'll use the lower number. We'll give the administration a benefit of the doubt. I don't believe it. We're going to see what happens, but it may be inconsequential anyway because the Supreme Court has got a rule on that this year, whether or not that Health Care Act is constitutional. What's this Medicaid? And look at the wheel. It's different. Why is that different? Medicaid is basically administered by the states, but half that money comes from the federal government. Okay? A lot of it comes from the federal government. But it's not recorded anywhere until it's paid out. So there is no anticipation of it because in 1 year, because there's no contract like under Social Security, social contract, because even Social Security, by the way, is not a legal contract. Could you believe that? If you read the Social Security Act, that once the fund runs out, there's no obligation to pay. And that's the reason the government is taking the liability for Social Security off the books. Can you imagine telling the people that, going for an election after you told them it's a lockbox, it's a trust fund? Tell them that we're not showing it as a liability because if we run out of the money, we don't have to pay you. See how fast those people are put out of office. But yet they've sold the people on a bill of goods. It's a lockbox. It's a trust fund. But with Medicaid, they can't even make that argument because Medicaid is really basically a year-to-year thing. But if you don't have Medicaid, you don't take care of the poor, what are you going to do? Are we going back to Charles Dickens, Tale of Two Cities, Oliver Twist? That's the consequence. There's real consequences. This is not just an academic exercise. Okay. Who holds our Treasury bills as of the year 2011? There it is. Foreign holders, 45%, And China went from 1 trillion to 2 trillion in 1 year. Now, China really has no choice. We are their biggest market. They need us. They're trying to convert their economy right now from an export economy into somewhat of a domestic economy. Okay? They have the same challenge as Japan. Japan is failing that challenge. Japan is really sick. Do you realize how sick Japan is? It's got the oldest population in the world, the lowest birth rate in the world. And what does that mean? That means there may not be enough money coming out of workers to pay the pensions. And they still haven't sanitized their books for 10 years' worth of bad loans. And yet the yen is way up. Well, people still think Japan is productive. They make good products. They got hit with that tsunami. We've got to see what happens. But they're in not good shape. Their debt is 200% of their GDP. Now, by the way, what is the GDP of the United States of America? Round numbers right now. 15, right? 15. National debt, just Treasury bills, is 15. That's 100%. If you read USA Today, no, it's only 76%. Why? They're looking at that number I gave you before, the publicly held debt. No, you got to look at least the 15. But if you looked at the 60 trillion, we're 400% of GDP right now in obligations, on the books and off the books. And we are worried about Greece with 150% of their debt to GDP. We better start worrying about America, but let's start telling the people the truth about what we're really spending. Okay. This is a, would you believe if you used the kind of generally accepted accounting principles that the government wants to use? Now, I'm the one who proposed, when I was a young congressman, I'm going to show you a picture of me in 1986. That's the cover of Management Accounting magazine. That's Joe Diaguardi having the hubris to put in a bill, H.R. 4495, to bring chief financial officers to every agency and department of the United States of America. I wasn't there a year before I realized we don't have good accountants in government. We have auditors, controllers, bookkeepers, but we didn't have professionally trained chief financial officers, management accountants that were certified, certified public accountants, and worse than that today, guess what we don't have? No independent audits whatsoever. Now, because of my bill that was passed in 1990, I wasn't there, and here's a beautiful letter I got from George Bush. You're going to see it in the book. This is George Bush, #1, saying, "Dear Joe, I know you're not here. I know how hard you worked. I'm signing the bill you put in." So I did leave something behind. But they didn't do it the way I wanted to see it. The CFOs were supposed to be independent. The top CFO was supposed to be a cabinet officer. Guess what they did? Politics. They put him 3 tiers down in the Treasury Department in OMB. So now he's a product of the system. He can't, or she, right now it's a he. He cannot do what I felt they could do. Represent the people like the board of directors of a company should be representing, with outside auditors, the shareholders, not the management. We don't have that yet in the federal government. That's why we're getting numbers that don't work. And if you looked at this balance sheet, look at the liabilities they're showing on this balance sheet. If you added in the entitlements, they're showing liabilities of $30 trillion. Unfunded, no, the unfunded entitlement is $30 trillion. Adding that to it, you get then total liabilities of $47 trillion. And that's not the half of it. Well, it's probably the half of it, but it's not all of it, because we have government-sponsored enterprises like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, the Post Office, all off budget. And yet, when they have deficits, they can float bonds that are backed, and Treasury bills, or bonds that are backed by the full faith and credit of the United States of America, and we have to pick that cost up. This all should be put on the books. Now, the bill that I had put in required GAAP accounting, but they came up with a separate agency and came up with a separate definition of generally accepted accounting principles for the federal government. That agency is the Federal Accounting Standards Advisory Board, FASAB. I didn't say FASB. That's the Federal Accounting Standards, the Financial Accounting Standards Board. That's for the private sector. FASAB is the government. And that is not independent because it's paid for by the Treasury, by the Congressional Budget Office, and by the Comptroller General. So they're going to come up with numbers that make the politicians look good, but I wanted to show you that we're starting to get there. They're starting to prepare balance sheets, but we don't have outside audits, And later on, if we have time, I want to read you the disclaimer that has to be signed by the Treasury, the Secretary of Treasury and the Comptroller General, that the material weaknesses in the Department of Defense are so big that since 1990, we have not been able to audit the entire statement, that approximately 40% of the numbers of the federal government relating to defense, the Defense Department, are unauditable. Therefore, we cannot give you a clean opinion. We cannot say that these statements fairly represent. And what makes it worse is they say in that same statement, it just came out a few weeks ago, they say in that same statement that they probably won't be able to begin to have auditable statements until 2017. Come on. Get outside accountants in there to do the job. Not one firm. Get a consortium. The people deserve better. This was done by Stanford University in conjunction with Come Back America, the former Comptroller General of the United States, David Walker. They decided to come up with a way to measure where one country stood versus another. And by the way, on this slide presentation, I made a bibliography. I've never done that before. But I figured, with good advice, since you are smart people, that you might want to get into where I got this stuff from, and you could read the whole report, it's a large one, on how they came up with this Sovereign Fiscal Responsibility Index. It's basically a compilation of three concepts: fiscal space, fiscal path, and fiscal governance. Now, I can get into all three. I understand them. But suffice it to say now that looking at those measures, and they're pretty good, the United States is where? 28 in the world out of 34 in terms of fiscal responsibility. What does that mean? Basically, can you trust our numbers? They're saying no. Now, why is Australia and New Zealand 1 and 2? Guess what? They're both on generally accepted accounting principles. And, you know, they don't have problems with spending money they don't have. What's our problem in America today? We're spending money we don't have, we're borrowing from countries we don't trust, and we're putting the American dream in jeopardy. Your dream. The dream my father came from Italy as a poor boy at 15, 1929, during the Depression, no education. I'm his oldest son. Was raised in the Bronx. We had a grocery store that I know when we moved to Westchester County in 1957, and I got a job as Joey the waiter for 4 years in a country club around the corner from that house, because my old man said, if you don't get a job, you're coming back to the store. Did I know I would be the congressman for that great county? No. But that's America. You've got to think big, and you've got to work hard. But you've got to be empowered, and you've got to be empowered with information. Going to this school has put you above many, many people in this country. Don't lose that edge. Okay, rethinking the role of government at all levels. Okay, you can read it. What's the federal government? What's the states? And what's subsidiarity? And why is that accountability? Why am I a small government conservative? Because I've lived my life as a fiscal. My father wouldn't spend a dime unless he had it. When he bought that house in Westchester County in 1957, I went with him. I was 16. We had to go to all the banks to get the cashier's checks from the savings accounts that he had. He wouldn't even think of getting a mortgage. Now, look at America today. Everything is, I mean, look at some of your families. Look at your credit cards. A lot of people are living where the minimum they're paying is the interest on the debt, one step away from bankruptcy. May not be your families, but maybe some of your friends. We've been seduced into thinking that we could spend money we don't have. Sooner or later, it comes back to haunt you. And basically, why am I a small government conservative? Because you can control things when they're in your hands. The federal government is too far away. Sure, it needs to have national security, an army, the environmental issues, a lot of issues. The states can't replace the federal government. But if the states can handle things like education and other things, we can then control it better. You might say, where's the states going to get the money? Let them raise the taxes. Let not the federal government raise the taxes, because it may just build a much bigger bureaucracy that we can't control. Let's bring those people back to the state level. Let's finance it at the state level, where we can see it. You know that school districts, budgets are turned down routinely. I know in my Westchester County they are, because the school taxes are very high. My county, Westchester, is the #1 county in America for the highest real estate taxes. You can imagine how upset people are. Especially the older people who don't want to move out, who want to stay in the place they built, and they can't afford it because of those school taxes. But they're starting to vote down the school budgets. You can't vote down the budget of the United States of America. You might be able to affect it if it's closer to you at the state or city level. So think about that. What is subsidiarity? Basically, the concept of subsidiarity is don't let the federal government do what the states can do. Don't let the states do what the cities and localities can do. Bring government closer to the people where it can be controlled. I don't care what your party is, that has to be common sense. Okay, the way to save America. You know, without leadership, where are we going as a country? We had great leaders in the past. Look at FDR. FDR knew what to do during the depths of the recession. He knew how to put people to work, a massive infrastructure program. Why didn't we do that? Only a year ago did I hear the administration say we're going to spend $50 billion on infrastructure. Why didn't they start 3 years ago with $500 billion? Many of you are economists. Doesn't it make sense when interest rates are below 2% to borrow to then put into infrastructure? When economists tell you, Professor, that if you do infrastructure properly, the return is between 15 and 20%. The bridges, the roads. It makes the economy fluid. Cars are moving, trucks are moving. They're not stuck on bridges. Bridges are not falling down. Why didn't we do this? Only now we're thinking we need to go back for infrastructure? And there's a problem with our accounting on that. Guess what? We spent $500 billion last year on things, big things. Aircraft carriers, $1 billion. I'm not talking about bullets. I'm talking about big things. Buildings. Where did it go? Anybody know? In the deficit. On this accounting system they're using, you don't put on the books the assets that have a useful life of 10 and 20 years. It goes right into the deficit. Mindless. These are the things that are benefiting future generations. And by the way, if you don't have the right kind of accounting system, you're not being fair to the next generation, or even this generation, because you're not allocating the true costs of what it costs to run a country, to serve the public across each generation. You're stealing from one generation and giving to another. And basically, that's what's happening to you. Your money is being stolen, and it's not being reported. You're going to have to pay this back. That's what this debate is all about. How do we bend that debt curve down? One congressman, the chairman of the Budget Committee, a Republican, tried to, Ryan, he got shot out of the water. As soon as he mentioned we need at least $4 trillion of deficit reduction in the 10 years, and then he goes into Medicare and Medicare and Social Security. I mean, it was like a war. We need to have these honest debates. We can't wait anymore. We cannot be held hostage to a system that's not serving us. And that's why I said something as outrageous as, number one, redistricting panels that are independent. Not like we have in New York State right now where the parties, please each other by giving you more Democrats because you're a Democrat, I'll take more Republicans, and we saved our seats. That's not going to help the public. Because then what you're going to do is you're going to constrain competition of ideas. You're going to constrain good people coming in. That is no good for America. Too many elections are no good for America. Why do we have elections every 2 years for the House? Why not 4 years? If it means changing the Constitution, do it. Why not 1 year for president, 1 term for president, 6 years? Is that outrageous? Let them concentrate for 6 years on what they have to do as a leader and get it done and not worry about raising money to run again. And now we've got this mindless citizens union thing, which was a 5-4 decision, whether you like it or not. It's probably going to have to be changed, and it's probably going to be changed by Congress, because people are upset that these super PACs now are dominating everything. We want to hear the people. We don't want to hear the consultants. Okay, staying competitive globally. We're not exporting enough. You know that. We are a consumer-based economy. Did you know that 70% of our economy is basically buying? Consumers. That's why you see so many ads. We need to balance that. We need to create jobs and export things. Our productivity, technology, We need to go back to investing in R&D. We've got to realize that when we take money out of NASA and certain parts of the federal armed services like DARPA, that technology went back into the private sector. We've got to be careful. We've always won, even with the waste and fraud and abuse that you saw from the Grace Commission, because we had the technological edge, and we've got to keep it. Infrastructure. We need to do a lot more with infrastructure. Education, I think you can talk a lot about it, but we've got to do a better job. Shared responsibility. I think we have to look at ourselves as shareholders in this great country and say each of us has to do something. Now we see people in Occupy Wall Street, God bless them, I was down there addressing them, and well-intentioned. Some of them are very smart, and it's good that they're doing that, because America needs to be woken up in every way, and I think that is going to continue. Tax reform. There's no issue in my mind that our tax code is so complex and so unfair that we have to go back and eliminate about $1 trillion worth of tax deductions and loopholes and write-offs and somehow flatten that tax rate and make sure that we just look at the things that are absolutely necessary for deductions, maybe charitable deductions, and maybe the interest on mortgages up to a certain amount, but we need to reform the whole code. Budget and accounting reforms. I proposed those forms, those accounting reforms in my bill, but budget reforms, what does that mean? Right now, if you look at the budget of the United States of America, it's one big pot. It includes the infrastructure. It includes the government-sponsored enterprises. It includes the trust funds. And it includes everything else, and you get one number. No, there should be at least 3 silos. We should have a separate budget for trust funds. Should not be melded with the rest. We should have a separate budget for the government-sponsored enterprises. These were supposed to be entities that broke even, but a lot of them are losing money, and then a budget for everything else, so we can see what's working, what's not working. That's the budget reform I'm talking about. In my book, you'll see it. I hope you have a chance to read it. And then finally, the outrageous thing I said before, many of you didn't think of, electoral reforms, changing the way we elect people so that we get better leaders. Without better leadership, we are finished as a nation. You could see the signs. I didn't write that book. Brzezinski did. But he said everything that I believe in. And it just came out. If you want to read it, it just came out last couple of weeks ago. So with that, I thank you for your attention. I hope I gave you some information, but I hope I motivated you to learn more, to get more involved, to do something. God bless you. Good luck to all of you. Okay?